When companies like Uber and Lyft came to market back in 2012, it wasn't uncommon to hear their founders talk idyllically of a world where we could finally reap the benefits of one of our biggest untapped resources in transportation, the 4 empty seats next to you in your car. And they were certainly right about that problem being a major inefficiency in the transportation network. Carpooling has long been the hoped-for solution, and we've had some success with incentives like HOV or HOT lanes, but single-occupancy vehicles continue to rule the roads. So the industry that we originally called ride-sharing seemed like the prince that was promised. And for researchers, trying to figure out the impacts of these companies felt almost like we were exploring a whole new planet. But there was one big problem with that: data, and the fact that these so-called ride-sharing companies don't want to be data-sharing companies. So what did we do? Well, PhD student Alejandro Henao signed up to become a driver for both Uber and Lyft. He started driving, and we started collecting data. Alejandro collected data on each trip: where he picked up passengers, where he dropped them off, how long it took, how much they paid, and how much money he got. Although all the trips took place in the Denver region, we randomized where Alejandro started driving and made sure he drove during all different times of day, as well as during big events. To keep our results on the conservative side, we also minimized how much driving Alejandro did. He usually parked and waited for the next ride request instead of driving around between rides. Once we got our survey approved, we were also able to ask our passengers a few questions, and almost all of them were happy to answer during the drive. We asked them why they were using Uber and Lyft, as well as Uber Pool and Lyft Line, what sort of destination they were going to, and what they would have done had these services not existed. We ended up with 416 rides and 311 passenger surveys. While we thought our data set was pretty good, the recent Uber IPO documents showed it was even more representative than we had imagined. This is a graph of the cumulative distribution of ride distances from Uber's IPO, and this is a graph of the same statistic from Alejandro's research. Pretty similar. What did we find? Even with our conservative approach, more than 40% of the mileage driven was done without a passenger. So while we averaged 1.4 passengers per ride, we only averaged 0.8 passengers per mile driven. Every 100 miles driven with a passenger meant 69 miles of what we call deadheading, when there's no passenger and the driver's not making any money. And when we accounted for how people would have traveled, we ended up with 83.5% more vehicle miles traveled than if these services didn't exist. So it doesn't seem like these wrongly called ride-sharing companies are doing all that much to help the empty seat inefficiency in our system. For the most part, they're functioning pretty similarly to taxis, and this is one reason why these companies are now referred to as ride-sourcing or ride-hailing as opposed to ride-sharing. But one of the benefits we did find had to do with parking. Our results suggest that 26.4% of ride-sourcing trips would have been driving trips, and these numbers tended to be higher at restaurants, bars, stadiums, event venues, and airports. So we should be able to reduce the supply of parking at these land uses, particularly because the relationship is bidirectional. In other words, the amount of parking we supply and how much it costs can also influence people to use ride sourcing more or less often. Lastly, we looked at how much money these drivers earn. While ads suggest you could make a decent living driving for these companies, we found nearly $15.60 per hour. That number drops quite a bit when we account for driving expenses. Given 3 common expense scenarios and accounting for those pesky deadheading miles, we estimate that drivers only take home between $5.72 and $10.46 per hour. That's before taxes. The majority of drivers end up making less than minimum wage. This study obviously isn't the final word on ride-sourcing companies. They seem intent on trying to fix some of the issues, for instance by offering discounted rates for shared rides and making sure the last ride of the shift ends up somewhere near the driver's home. If you want to explore the details, check out the link below. This research was done by Alejandro Henao, who worked on this while at UC Denver, but is now a researcher at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and Wes Marshall, a professor of transportation at the University of Colorado, Denver. This video was made by me, Faffs Riederer. For more research of this kind, check out the Transportation Research Center at CU Denver, a part of the College of Engineering, Design, and Computing. Thanks to the Mountain-Plains Consortium and the U.S. Department of Transportation for funding this research.